many people, we're now over a 20 million, 20, I think 0.4 million people in the United States have come down with COVID, and we're over 400,000 people who have died. One person who got COVID early, the first person in the state of Alaska, and one of the first people then down here in Washington State, was my uncle. And Rod lives in Juneau, and boy, he went in the hospital. He was on a ventilator for 28 days. And when they, at Bartlett Hospital in Juneau, recognized that they couldn't treat him there and my Uncle Rod wouldn't have a chance of making it with only 2 ICU beds there, they asked the family if sending him down to Virginia Mason would be okay, and the family said absolutely. And so 82 days later, after 28 days on a ventilator, my uncle left Virginia Mason, went into long-term care. He's alive today because of your work at Virginia Mason, Gary, and I just want to bring him up on screen here now. My Uncle Rod Wilson, the patriarch of the family right now. Well, thanks for doing this, Rod. I just thought it was really super special to have a care experience as extreme and as intensive as yours was, be able to circle back with, in this case, the CEO and chair of Virginia Mason. Do you have anything you want to say to Gary Kaplan here?
Well, I just want to say you've got outstanding staff, and I would not be here today without them. It's that simple. And I'm sorry, you're probably going to see me breaking up quite frequently during this part, but it is kind of touching. And I want to make a note that I've put together a short paper for DJ, and he's going to post it on his company website, so you can read all the fine, gory details that you want. And I'm not going to go through those today. Instead, I'm going to focus on other things. I want to focus on not me, but the people at Virginia Mason. It is true, I was in Seattle on the week of the 10th of March when there was a big outbreak at a nursing home I think it was in Kirkland, I'm not sure, but a number of elderly people died. And my wife and I, we were at Virginia Mason. My wife has MS, and we were at Virginia Mason doing a medical checkup for her. And just so happened that on the 10th of March, we flew back home out of SeaTac Airport. It was pretty early on in the whole process. And when I took the car back over to the airport to drop it off, they put you on a bus and shuttled you back to the airport. They probably had 150% occupancy on that bus. I mean, it was standing room only. There were no masks. There was no social distancing. Everybody was cramped in there like sardines. Well, on the 20th of March, I was incapacitated totally. And it's kind of funny that I was doing things like my taxes clear up until like the 19th of March, and everything was pristine and perfect. And on the 20th of March, bingo, it hit. And 3 days later, Bartlett Hospital had been touching base. Dr. Schneider, I think, had been talking with Dr. Ingram down in Virginia Mason, and they said, send him down. And so they medevaced me out that night. And I made it to Virginia Mason, and I was not at all conscious. They had basically put me out at Bartlett. So most of what I remember from Virginia Mason is afterwards. I don't remember a lot of the gruesome stuff. They corresponded, and I can't say this enough. Virginia Mason staff corresponded with my wife and my daughter every single day. And they didn't try to paint any rosy pictures. They told it exactly the way it was. You know, my daughter says many a times, she said she laid there at night waiting for that phone call in the middle of the night. And she said the phone call never came, and the next day came by and they were all happy because they made it through one more night. Well, like DJ said, after they took me off the ventilator, normally you come out of this induced coma thing fairly rapidly. I remained in coma for 13 days after they took me off the ventilator. And one morning, one morning, the nurse, the little nurse that came in and was taking care of me, she says, "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." And I says, "Well, good morning, ma'am. How are you?" And I swear to God, she must have wet her pants, because she looked over at the doctor and she says, "Did you hear that? He's back." And it went only uphill from there. So I don't remember when they actually moved me out of the intensive care part of Virginia Mason, but they did move prior to being released. They moved me, I guess, upstairs into the less intensive care areas. And the one thing that I remember most of all was every single person that I came in contact with greeted me with a smile. Yeah, there were those times when I would sit down with Dr. Ingram and he'd tell me, "Here's the bare facts, guy. You got to be prepared for this." And but I never ever saw that from the helper bees. The docs, yeah, you kind of expect that kind of thing. But the nurses and the mostly the helpers, the um, what CNAs, I guess they're called, those people were fabulous. And there was one in particular who we kind of struck up a friendship with. And by being down there for 2 or 3 months, my beard was 3 times the size of what you see now. And this little nurse, I called her Pippi Longstockings because she had braids like Pippi Longstockings. And she says, "Would you mind?" She says, "You look hideous." She says, "Would you mind if I trimmed your beard?" And I says, "I would love if you want to trim my beard." And she did. She trimmed my beard. And she even trimmed up on my hair a little bit. But I hadn't really shaved, cut my hair or anything since early March. And if you can imagine 4 months of growth, um, it it was really pleasant to have somebody that friendly to do that. So, there were the people there that were really great. The doctors were really great. I found it informative to hear you talk about telemedicine. And yes, indeed, the doctors there, they weren't just talking amongst themselves. They were talking to South Korea. They were talking to China. They were trying to find out what is the next step, because at that point in time, nobody really knew what the next step was. So I have to hand it to that. So after a while, I think it was 82 days, as DJ had said, I got moved from Virginia Mason over to Hearthstone Rehab Facility. And that was the first time that I got to see DJ physically, was over at Hearthstone. And Hearthstone was a rehab place. I had been on the ventilator so long, and I had lost so much weight that I had virtually no muscle mass left on my body. And so when I got there, my first process was just learning to roll over in bed. I couldn't even roll over in bed. I couldn't sit up, far be it from walking. I couldn't go to I couldn't make it to the bathroom. These people had to basically take care of me as a baby. Well, about a month into that, COVID reached out its nasty hand and grabbed me one more time. And this time it grabbed my blood supply. And the platelets that are in my blood fell to a drastically low level, to the point of literally bleeding to death. They sent me back to Virginia Mason again. And Dr. Ingram and Dr. Rosales at Virginia Mason spent an extra week with me there. This was, I believe, over 4th of July, and trying to figure out what was going on. They finally came up with a workaround solution, but I know for a fact that during that week, they were again on the phone or telemedicine trying to find out what was happening in other countries. So eventually they sent me back. They got that taken care of. They sent me back. And the first telemedicine that I can remember being on was with the doctor at Hearthstone. But their doctors there were not on-staff doctors. They were virtual doctors that they had hired through, I don't know, some kind of a contract thing. Anyway, when we got through with the doctor's meeting and she told me what all was going on, she says, "Oh, by the way, I need to see in your mouth. Open your mouth and stick out your tongue." And I thought, what in the world is this? So at some point in time, that must have been some kind of a Medicaid or Medicare requirement that they have a quasi physical interaction. Anyway, all that being said and done, go to the website, pick up that, it's 5 or 6 pages long. It is kind of long, but I don't refer to the doctors and healthcare providers in the same manner as most other COVID patients. Yes, they are my heroes, but they're more than that. They are my guardian angels, and you will see that. And all I can say is thank you very, very much, Virginia Mason. If it weren't for your activities, I would definitely not be here today. And that's about all I can say.
Thanks so much, Rod. It's I have to tell you, on behalf of all of our team members, it's a privilege for us. It's our privilege to be able to participate in your care. And for me personally, it's a real privilege, a joy to see you and know you and listen to your story. So thank you very much for allowing us that opportunity.
You're very welcome. There is one thing I would like to do, and it's not going to happen right away, but in about another year, when we can fly again, my wife and I and my daughter want to come back to Virginia Mason and meet the people who saved my life.
We'll make that happen.
Well, I should say that Virginia Mason is a sponsor of ours here at State Reform, but Uncle Rod, they did not ask us to infect you as part of this year's production.
Oh, I know.
Totally coincidental. So
No.
Thank you, Rod, for telling that story. That takes a lot of guts. And I love seeing you all verklempt like this, because it reminds me of, like, when I choke up, as happens way too often, that it's genetic and there's just nothing I can do about it. So thanks for pouring out your heart. I appreciate it.
Hey, Jerry, just very quickly, just say,
Sure.
for all of us, just that story is just incredible. And I'm calling him Uncle Rod now after spending a little time with him on Zoom. But his stories are the reason that all three of us and many more have gotten into healthcare. But
yes,
it is the highlight of my day to hear him and his story, and just really ecstatic that he's in great health right now. So congratulations, Rod. Thank you for that story.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for doing this and for your support. My uncle Rod Wilson, Katul Patel, and Gary Kaplan of Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, and Beth Johnson of Coordinated Care. I appreciate you guys making time to do this with us.